Okay, we're back. Just to
Good morning.
kind of poke fun at me. So for the audience, me and Kurt have talked at length about how to present this, and we keep coming back to it's so important that it's going to take some time. So we're already at 45 minutes, 48 minutes on, and we haven't even got to the first day of the Passover week. So, all right, buddy. So jump in. If you're just watching this for the first time, there's a part one of this that's really important. Okay. All right, boss.
Okay,
Jump in there.
well, let me get over here real quick to John again. John 12 is where we're at.
Okay.
And so when in John 12, like I said, different gospels talk about different things. So, but I like what John's saying here. So on the next day, he said that much people had come to the feast, and when they heard that Jesus was coming, so then we talked about that as being the Sabbath, day that he rode in on. And then the next day he walks in. Okay, so let me get to that part real quick. Maybe that's in, well, let me just say this. The next day he walked into Jerusalem, and he walks in
Right.
with his disciples. And on the way, they run into, let me get to it. I probably jumped over to John. I need to be over in Mark again. And I need to make Mark 12. Let me get to my notes here real quick.
Okay.
So in Mark, uh, in Mark, where am I at here? Okay, I'm in Mark 11. I'm sorry.
That's right. There's two really important chapters in two different books here.
Yeah,
And
and it's all over.
yeah.
I mean, we're all over the place here. It's kind of hard to do this, but Mark, it's in Mark in 11:12. And it says, okay, this is the next day. So on the morrow or tomorrow, the next day, when they were come to Bethany, he was hungry, and he saw a fig tree and, afar off, having no leaves. And this is interesting because this is at the time of Passover. And, you've had fig trees. You're a fig tree farmer. You
I
love
miss
fig
them so much.
and we had a fig tree at our place where we did our business, huge fig tree, and that fig tree would come in season as far as fruit, would come into season sometime around late August. And from your figs came in around sometime early September to late September, even October.
Right.
Some of the varieties. There's different varieties, but a lot of the varieties that were indigenous to Israel come to usually late August, early September is when what we're talking here, and that kind of matched up with the Feast of Atonement. Where they would have in Sukkot where they would have the ingathering of fruit, and
Right.
figs are mentioned there. So they had a lot of varieties of figs that came available to them late September, early October, like your fruit did at your
Right.
house.
Right.
So anyway, so he sees this tree, and it said it had no fruit up on it. So what's he do? He curses the tree, and he says, he says that he says, did I find anything thereon? He says, when I had come to it, he found nothing but leaves, for the time of the figs was not yet. So he understands that it's not time for figs, but
Right.
yet, why is he expecting fruit? Is he talking really about the fruit tree, or is he talking about something else? So, and Jesus answered, said unto, no man eat of the fruit of this tree forever. What?
Right.
You know,
Right.
why this tree, and why does he say forever? This tree, what's the life expectancy of a fig tree? 20, 30 years? And he said his
Maybe
disciples heard
longer.
it. Now his disciples are going, "What the?"
Why
As
is he
he put
saying?
down,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
they know Yeshua. Look, Yeshua is kind to them. Yeshua speaks in parables. He speaks things that are just totally mysteries to them. on all the time. I mean, how would you like to be? Oh, well, we're disciples of Christ, and there's a lot of mysteries in the Word that you and I discuss all the time. But the advantage that we have, we got years and years and years. I mean, I've been looking at some of these for 30 years. So, I'm still trying to figure out some of the mysteries. Can you imagine on the spot? They hear this fig tree being cursed, and all of a sudden they go, what? What's going
Right.
on here, right? So
Right.
anyhow, he curses the fig tree. So that's on the way into the temple. This is on Sunday. Now, the date on this is Abib 10, the 10th of Abib, which is
Right.
you can remember this from going back to chapter 12 of John, and it talks about on the 10th day you take for yourself a lamb, or for your household. This is for the
Right.
Passover lamb, Pesach lamb. That was the day that they chose the Pesach lamb. So this is on Sunday. So how many days are there till Passover? Well, we got Sunday, so it's Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, 4 days. There's your
Right.
4 days. The
Right.
14th is Passover. So Monday is the 10th, or
Right.
Sunday, excuse me, Sunday is the 10th of the
Right.
month. So I'm jumping already.
Yeah. First
So
day of the week.
first day, yeah, Sunday, the first day of the week. Now that kind of throws us Gentiles off because I always think of it as as the last day. It's the first day, the Sunday. The sun god gets the first day in the Greek and Roman
He
theology.
does.
Yeah.
Yeah, even it's even funny. We confuse ourselves following the Greek God for the first day of being Sunday, and yet we still treat it as the last day of the week. I mean, we're not paying attention. You're right. Right.
Yeah, and that's the thing, Yeshua always, he's always preeminent, in everything he does. He's got to be first, in everything. So he's preeminent. And so he always beats out the sun god on everything, because that's, if one thing that we don't understand about this culture right now is that there is a lot of Gentiles that are in Jerusalem too. Now, a lot of these people that have come from these foreign countries that we talked about, because we have one of these, these Sabbaths where people come from all over the world. Well, a lot of them have had Gentile kind of like Gentile influence in them,
Right.
where they come from, say, Turkey, and they've come from Rome, and they've come from Greece. They've come from some of these Gentile, even Decapolis on the other side of the Galilee was, pretty much Greek. So they're
Right.
they're used to Greek, but they're still Jews at heart. They still in their side. We have them today in the United States. They're not we don't call them. They're not Orthodox, but they still celebrate the Passover. They're secular, but yet they're
Right.
Gentiles, and they celebrate Christmas along with us, and they celebrate maybe Easter along with us, but they still have their Passover.
Right.
Oh, so
Right.
so that same thing's going on at the time of Yeshua. So Sunday's a big day, but he's, like I said, Yeshua's preeminent in everything. So he goes to the temple, and what's supposed to be happening at the temple, they're supposed to be selling. If they're going to sell anything, it's got to be outside of the temple grounds. In other words, it's got to be outside the temple. It's got to be outside the temple walls there. They'd set up their booths and everything, and they would sell sacrifices for the Pesach, because people are coming when they're coming from these other nations. They didn't bring their lambs with them,
Right.
so they're at the mercy of buying their lamb at the temple, for their sacrifices. That's why this is such an important time, because
Right.
I got to get my Pesach lamb. So the only place to buy it was at the temple. And remember, these Pesach lambs, they have to be at a certain age. They have to be probably no less than 6 months old, because they had to be weaned off their mother's milk. We found that in some verses where it says, don't boil the kid in his mother's milk. So it
Right.
had to be past the age of being weaned, and couldn't be any more than a year old according to the scriptures. Like,
Right.
because that
Right.
was a time of innocence for that kid, for that
Right.
lamb. When they got over a year old, then they get into the mating thing, and their innocence is lost. They're
Right.
starting to get closer to their adulthood, as they get past a year old. So they had these limitations of a year old in no less than 6 months old. So they couldn't just, and they couldn't, these people from other nations couldn't carry their lamb with them. They bought the lambs. Now, the lambs that were sold there were supposed to be without blemish, and we know that that probably didn't happen. A lot of these lambs were probably bought at a discount because these guys are in business. They're entrepreneurs, they're capitalists. They probably got a crooked leg, maybe, or a spot, or a blemish, or maybe they're a little over a year old. Who's gonna know, right? Because I didn't raise this lamb from its beginnings, and maybe
Right.
it has been weaned off of its mother's milk, maybe, so there's a lot of there's no quality control. Let's put it that way. So when Yeshua comes into the temple, not only is he dealing with that, with the integrity of the sacrifice, he's also dealing with the money changers. Now, why are there money changers? Because again, we have people from all over the world that have made a pilgrimage. It's a
Right.
pilgrimage feast. They've made this pilgrimage from other nations, and they got to
Right.
exchange their money, Turkish money, maybe, I don't know, Greek money, for the temple coin. And
Right.
why they need the temple coins? To purchase their lambs, So they got to, before they can do anything. So now the Pharisees there have pretty much running the business in the temple. So it's inside the temple. So they've got a cut of everything. So everybody's kind of saying, well, I know the Pharisees got to get their cut. We got to make our profit. So their exchange rate's not right either. So they're not even given a good exchange rate on their money, from foreign money to the domestic money. There's a lot going on there, money laundering going on, sort of, or whatever it is,
Right.
they're and the exchange rate's not quite what it should be. So there's a lot of shady things going on at the temple. So when Yeshua goes in there, he knows that, first of all, there's integrity problems with and then he's run into this before in chapter 2 of John. It says he did the same thing again, that he did this before. It was right after uh, the Cana thing, the Cana marriage feast that he went to. It says later on, as you get down in chapter 2 there, that he said the Passover was near, and he went to the temple and overturned the tables. Now, did that happen twice? It looks like it might have. That he protested this not just once, but twice. He did early in his ministry, the beginning of his ministry, because that's what chapter 2 of John is the beginning of his ministry. He hasn't quite even gotten into his ministry yet,
Right.
um, at that time. But so they said that Passover was near, in chapter 2 of John. But here later on, he's doing the same thing. He's going into the temple, overturning the tables. And he is madder than a wet hen. And he says, my house shall be called by all nations. And he's reminding all the people that are there, of all nations, the house of prayer. This is the house of prayer. What are you guys doing? I mean, you guys should know better, especially the Pharisees. But you have made it a den of thieves. And it says, then the scribes and the chief priests heard it, and they thought how they might destroy him. In other words, you're messed up a good deal. We got a money making scheme going on here. This is something we do every year. It's like you
Right.
know, like a sale that we have once a year. I mean, because just remember, this only happens one day, the 10th of Abib. This is the only day it can happen legally in near the temple, is because that's the day they took their Pesach lamb and bought it.
Right. Right.
And I'm talking too much. I'm not letting you in here, but
No, no, no. This is really important because we everybody glances just glazes over this, but you're right. They monetized the feast. They monetized God's feast. They made a business out of it.
they
How
made a business.
and
Well, we
and
do it
and
today.
and in walks God. How? how else could, I mean, there had to be a correction. He had to say something to him. There's there's just no other way.
Well, he's indignant. You know, people say, well, didn't he sin in doing it? No, he's indignant, righteous indignation. You know, it's a righteous thing. He's doing this on for the sake of righteousness. He's doing this. It's the right thing to do and say. This is a holy place.
It's his
This
house.
this is a place of worship, a place of prayer. You know, it's a solemn place. It's a place that to reflect on God, and you have turned it into a marketplace. And it's
Yeah,
not just a marketplace. It wouldn't be so bad if it was just a marketplace. He calls it a den of thieves. And it is a den of thieves because you got these people, you know, coin changers, you know, we explained that already. The coin changers are not, you
right.
know, they're not up and up, and neither are the people selling the sacrifices. They're not up and up. No
Right.
one's up and up. This truly is a den of thieves,
Amen.
and he's
Yeah.
mad. He's madder than a
Oh
wet
yeah.
hen.
Yeah.
And
Quite honestly,
but the scribes and the Pharisees, they're mad now because he's upset their business deal. Now, where you know, after he does this, let me ask. This is a question to ask. You know, this is done at the you know pretty much at the beginning of the day. Where do these people get their get their lambs and their where are they going to buy them at? You know,
right.
in my opinion, what's happened now is they probably moved their stuff out of the temple and to the outside where it belongs.
Right.
Imagine by the end of the day, within a few hours, those people have reset themselves outside outside the temple, walls or whatever, wherever that
Right.
place was, where they could legally, sell and do business outside of the temple. But
Yes.
to do it at the temple, should never
No,
been done.
to that point, this wasn't a minor event. The crowd knew who he was. He's the Messiah. I mean, they proclaimed him the day before, and he comes in again today, the next day, the first day of the week. This wasn't a minor event. They had to be thinking what was really going on, and to understand his zeal, the strength, because we forget this each and every day. I think he could have destroyed the temple right there. He could have. I mean, he's sovereign. He could have
Or
said,
those who selling it could have destroyed them.
"Could yeah, I could have spoke to him," and then just so so.
God's long suffering. He's long suffering. He sees the
Amen.
end. The end. He
Amen.
sees the end goal there.
Amen.
He's not impatient. He has a plan. It's just like, he should. I've said many times with the abortion laws we have that he could have destroyed the United States. I mean, how many abortions do we have? And an abomination of God, 60 to 70 million abortions in this country, just in this country. That's not including Europe and the rest of the world. I mean, it's in the billions, that people that should have been on this planet to receive his inheritance, possible inheritance, they've been destroyed, and it's an abomination. God says you should put a millstone around your neck. But,
Right.
kind of getting off a little bit, but, he's, God is long suffering. He has a plan. He's working it. And like Peter said, don't be impatient because a day is like 1,000 years to
To the
us,
Lord.
to the
Yeah.
Lord. God's
Amen.
day is 1,000 years to us. So don't be impatient. When he says, I'm coming back soon, he meant soon. That
Right.
could be as little as 2 days, 2,000
Right.
years.
It's his calendar, his time.
His
Yeah.
calendar, his time, his
Amen.
long suffering. He's all about it. It's his plan. Don't stress over it. Our lives are, I'm at the end of my life. I'm 74 years old now, or close to it. I'm almost 74, and you're in your early 50s still. But you saw how fast that went. Our life's fast. Things are happening at a fast pace, and the
Sure does.
days go by really very very quickly now. For me. I don't know how about
Right.
you, but my days are
They do. They do. They go fast.
ah.
They go fast. So that day, what
But
else happens
what
that
else happens that
that
day?
day?
Here's what's fascinating. After he does all that, he sits
Right.
down in the temple and starts teaching again.
Amen. Man,
Okay,
what a
so
important
he's
part.
all about these last days that he has on earth, and he knows what the battle plan is. He knows that he knows he's going to die. I mean, he's got the calendar and it's winding down. And so what he's doing is he's giving his last instructions, his last teachings to his disciples and anyone else that'll listen to him. And all those who are at the temple. So he takes advantage of that situation at the temple and he teaches. But at the same time, that very day, he's confronted by the scribes and the Pharisees, and they're asking, "By what authority do you do this?" And he
Right.
and he explains to them that on my Father's authority, But see, we got to understand about Yeshua is that he's the servant son. We talked about this before. He's the servant son. He speaks with his Father's authority.
Right.
He's there. He is God. Let's not undermine who he is. He is God, but he's in a form that's a little less than Elohim at this point. So
Right.
is he full? Does he say I'm God? No, he doesn't. He claims to be the servant of God, by calling himself the Son of God. Well, he doesn't call himself, but everyone else does. And
Sure.
he's inferred it a few times, like before Abraham was I am. He's gone that far to say I'm the I am.
Right.
I'm Yahweh, but I'm in a flesh form of Yahweh. I'm the flesh form of Yahweh. And
Right.
and we've already saw that as birth. They've already testified to that as birth. He's Emmanuel, God in the God with us. So, but he speaks with his Father's authority because he's his servant of God, because he
Amen.
calls himself a servant of God, and he calls himself the Son of Man, which is saying, "I'm the servant of man, the servant son of man." The servant
Right.
son, the servant son is he serves man, and because he serves man, he's become lowly. But because he serves God, he's become high and exalted. He's like this. I mean, it's like your hat. He's the beginning and the end. There is none greater. You can't go any higher and you can't go any lower. He's the lowest and he's the greatest. He's the greatest because he is the lowest. You know, because
Because
he's
he's served.
because of his servitude.
Right. Right.
So but that's what he's doing in the temple. He's serving the people by teaching them about his Father in heaven.
Mm. Amen.
You know,
Amen.
so he continues doing that, and then of
Right.
course, at the end of the day, he leaves, and when he leaves, they're they go back to Bethany. And interesting enough, it says in the morning when he comes back. Now, what is he doing the next day? Are we ready for the next day? Or are you still we still on
Yeah.
Sunday?
Yeah. Yeah. We are. I guess we're going to the second day of the week. Um, so
Monday.
for everybody, that was Sunday, the first day of the week, the preceding day, and then this is the would be the second day of and I got to add this. So the lamb has to be presented.
This is the
Uh,
11th. This is the 11th. Now we've gone from the 10th of the month,
right,
which was Sunday. Now we're going to go into the 11th. Now he's already returned to Bethany with his disciples.
right,
Now he's coming back in the morning, you know, and it's in Mark 11:20. If you want to go there and look at it,
sure,
it says in the morning as they passed by, they saw a fig tree dried up from the roots. We got to
right,
talk about the fig tree. Okay,
right,
so it says Peter calling to remembrance says unto him, Master or Rabbi, behold the fig tree which thou cursed is withered away. But what's unusual, because he points this out in the beginning, so what's unusual, it dried up from the root up. Now the so what you're looking at is half the tree halfway up is dried and withered, and yet the top part of the tree is still green. Can you see that what I'm saying?
yeah,
I went out
yeah,
camera.
yeah. I'm
So
just having a
the
thought
top
here.
half of the tree is withered away. So this particular day now, he's gonna give them some something more to think about and give us something to think about. What's going on here? Why is
Right.
this fig tree withered, from the root up, and it's dying in a way that I've never seen before. This is unnatural. And because it's unnatural, it brings the attention back to that fig tree. If it had just died from how normal trees, we live in Georgia, you live in Missouri, we're used to seeing trees die and they start at the top. They always start at the top and they die their way down to, all the way down to the bottom,
Right.
till they finally die. So we've seen that over and over again. But I personally have never seen a tree die from the root up. Have you? Have you ever seen that happen? I've never seen that
Well,
happen.
well, you would never see it outwardly. That's kind of I was thinking that it would rot on the inside generally, and we that wouldn't be something we could see. So to be able to physically see it die from the root up, and I might add, the spiritual part for me is Yeshua, God cursing that fig tree. We're going to get into what the fig tree represents, but we all have to be so careful because when we speak, we speak to the detriment of others and ourselves, and God's showing the power of. And Kurt's gonna call it a curse, and it is a cursed thing. It's to be attached because, but it's so important in our daily lives that and it didn't fall short on Peter, did it? Peter remembered the day before. Yeshua said, "Hey, that dang old tree." And okay, so to get back
Oh,
in,
first of
what's
all,
the tree?
that
Yeah,
still had to be a mystery to him why he cursed at the
right,
beginning.
right,
I mean, it didn't deserve what it got in their opinion, because
right,
it wasn't the season for figs, and but yeah, he was
right,
expecting fruit, and
right.
it
Well,
was. They
yeah,
consider that unjust. I mean, isn't that
right,
kind of like not only weird but unjust of you to curse that fig tree because it's not supposed to produce fruit until we're in. Remember what Pesach was? That's
right. It's
another
spring,
we. It's
spring,
spring. It's the beginning of
right,
spring. The leaves are barely on the trees now. On the fruit trees, they're brand new. But
right.
the fruit will come to another several months. What? You
Right.
got it's May,
Six,
June, July,
four,
August,
4 months.
four
Yeah.
to five, 4 to 5 months at the 4 months in the earliest, 5 months more likely, when that. So we're 5 months away from that tree producing anything, and yet he cursed it. What in the world, Lord? Are you out of your mind? I mean, are you okay? They never said that, and I'm glad they never did because they trusted him. They said there's something going on here. They're not quite sure what it is, and I'm sure that people that don't know what this means are thinking the same thing. And I think sometimes the credibility of the word we lose credibility in the word because of things like this, because people don't understand it. They say, well, this is a fairy tale. This there's no credibility to the Bible because they don't understand what's being said. Do you agree
Well,
with that?
to that point, and whether you're new, old, or you've studied for years as a believer, God speaks to us in the spirit. Now he tries to give us revelation in something physical that we can see, but if you're not listening to him in the spirit, then to that point, and I know Kurt's going to cover this here in a second. Yeshua is saying to us, here's a fruit bearing tree. And his expectation, like it was in the garden, that it always would have fruit. And that's there's probably thousands, if not, like John said, you can't contain the books, what to be written about what Yeshua said to us. But to that point, he wants you to see it spiritually. And he reminds us that every day. So probably in God's economy, every tree should bear fruit all the time. But Kurt's going to get into what the tree represents next, I'm sure.
Yes. Well, okay. So the fig tree, what is it? What does it represent? Well, I had to just study this, several years ago. I studied this, because I was curious myself. What does the fig tree represent? Now, the first time you see anything to do with the fig tree is back in the garden, with
Right,
Adam and Eve. You see Adam and Eve after they've fallen from grace. they find themselves naked and unclothed. So what do they clothe themselves with? A fig leaf. Where? Well, the groin area in front, usually, in the front is where you see it depicted and talked about. And that area, of course, this area of our body, our waist area of our body, is what God would call it a covenant area, because that's the area where circumcision took place. That's where the covenant of marriage is consummated. That's the place where children are where they originate. That's where a child was born from. So it's a covenant area. We wear the
Right.
belt of truth. God said, or Paul says, the belt of truth is in a covenant area. We
Right.
put that belt on in that area. You saw it depicted in the statue, of brass, the brass, area of the statue, Nebuchadnezzar's statue. You see
Right.
the brass there, was the Greek, the
Right.
covenant that he was going to make. So, of the with the Gentiles, being the
Sure.
brass. So, so it to me that, that fig tree always represented covenant, and it represented the law, because the law was the thing that they tried to cover themselves with, is the law.
Right.
And when Yeshua goes to pick a disciple, I think it was Philip, or was it Nathaniel? It was Nathaniel. When he goes to select Nathaniel, he says, "I saw you sitting under the fig tree." Well, why does he
Right.
say that to him? Because the fig tree he was sitting under the law. He
Right.
probably was sitting underneath the fig tree. They're nice to sit under. They're like a little patio. We had one office like that. And we used
Beautiful.
to, yeah, we could sit under it. It was like a darn picnic area in the middle of it. So, but the law is the covering that
Right.
he's talking about. Nathaniel had that covering. He understood the law. He was a lawful man, is what it was saying. So, and there's a lot. I won't get into the study of a fig tree, but let's just suffice to say that the fig represents the law. So what is he saying there? Well, he's saying that I came, and in fact you see that in that parable of the garden you like to talk about, where they got a fig tree in the middle of it, of the vineyard. They have a fig
Right.
tree, and he says, "For 3 years I've come, and there's no fruit on this tree." And he says, and he says, let's just chop it down, because it's it cumbers the ground. It's a burden upon the ground. It's
Right.
taking nutrients out of the ground in the vineyard. He's got this vineyard, and in the center he's got this fig tree. And he says, it's just, all it's doing is just taking up nutrients. It's taking up water, it's taking up resources, and it has no value. Because why? Because it has not produced any fruit. And that's what he's saying about the law. The
Right.
law produced nothing. It had no fruit upon it. Now, did it? What the purpose of the law was to keep them from, or it was the knowledge of good, what was good, and it was also the knowledge of what was evil. In fact, in
Right.
320, I think it's in 321 of Romans, Paul talks about it. He says, "Look, that you know the knowledge of the law is to know good and evil." So
Right.
so it goes right back to the garden. what
Right.
was what was that tree that Adam and Eve were going to eat from? What was that fruit? That fruit was a fig, not an apple. It was a fig. Why? Fig is sweet, boy. I mean, I love them. I eat way too many of them, and there's ramifications of that for that.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
there's there's bad bad things could happen to you from eating too much of those, but you can eat those
Rapidly.
all day long. Yeah, we both
Right.
experienced it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
the fruit is sweet. It's sweet.
Probably
Whereas
nothing better. Probably
yeah.
nothing better.
So the
Yeah.
law was very palatable. We desired it, for our flesh desires it. So
Right.
the law was what he's doing. He's cursing the law. He said, "No one will eat from this law, or this, for their righteousness' sake. They will not eat from this tree forever." He says, "Forever. I'm
Right.
putting an end to it." He's making a proclamation on that day. That's the important day. On Monday morning, he's making a proclamation saying, "From this day on, you're not eating from this tree any longer. I'm not
Amen.
requiring it." So
Yeah.
how's it die? How's it die? It dies from the root up. What is the root of the law? Who is the there's a who involved here. Who is the root of the law?
He's the lawgiver, right? God
He's the
himself.
lawgiver. He's the one that wrote it. He's the one that gave it. He is the root of it. So who's
Right.
dying first in the law?
He's going
He
to give
is.
himself. He's going to give himself for that purpose. Yes.
Right. He's the
Yes.
root.
He's been
It's like
feeding it, nurturing it. Now he's cutting it off. Yeah.
he's like, he calls himself the root of David. Well, he's the root of the law too. He's the one that gave it. He's the one that wrote it. He's the one that required it. And he's the one that was the propitiation for it. So he's giving himself on behalf of keeping the law, and he is the law keeper. He's kept the law perfectly, and he's going to forever. He can't. He's not a liar. He's got to keep his own law. God keeps the law perfect, but because of what it did to us, it was a curse to us because we couldn't keep it. Because the penalty of not keeping the law was death, and he came that we might overcome eternal death, that we would have eternal life. So he is the root of that law, and he's going to die first for the sake of that tree that's going to die. He's the root of it, and because he dies, the whole tree is going to die. Now, did when Yeshua dies, did the law completely die all at once? And the answer is no, it didn't. Right, it did not. From the time Yeshua dies in 30 A.D., there's 40 years that pass until we see the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. So it's
Right.
40 years, which is a cleansing, 40 years. So
Right.
they had 40 years to wind that tree down, so the tree is dying slowly and finally sees its final death in 70 AD when the top of the tree, which is basically the temple and the priesthood, are destroyed by the Romans in 70
Right.
AD. Then the Jews go into diaspora. We know the rest of the story. Hopefully, everybody knows this. They go into diaspora, then to the world, and they end up living in the nations for almost 2,000 years until the fig tree comes back again. In a sense, it does. It
It
comes
does.
back. In this form of Israel.
Amen.
That we have today, 1948. So I
Amen.
went a
And
little further on that, but the fig
but
tree. Go ahead. We need to
well,
know
that
the parable of the fig tree according to Yeshua.
right.
Learn the
Well,
parable of the fig. No,
right.
no one
Right.
understand what it is and who it is.
Yeah.
So we're trying
Pull
to
your hat.
explain.
Yeah. Pull your hat down tight and understand it because the Bible's all over teachings of the fig and the agrarian society God providing but to your point, Kurt, that again, got to see it spiritually, and he doesn't hide anything from us if you listen closely and you dwell on his word, you think about what he said, what he's done, and why he did it. It's it's so important and it's beautiful. I mean, wow, how can you miss that once it's explained to you, or once you've partaken of the teaching and you listen closely to what he's saying? It's so important, so important.
Can I finish that day off now, and,
Yeah,
and we'll
yeah, well,
wind it
yeah,
up
that whole 30-minute thing. Now we're probably
on
going to be a
fig tree.
couple hours, and we're not even we're just touching,
Oh, we're till Monday.
the week,
We're on Monday.
right? Okay,
But the rest of here's what I mean. Of course, then they proceed into, this is happening on the Mount of Olives. To just point this
right,
out. This is where the fig tree's at. So they're
right,
they're walking down the path still. They're on their way to Jerusalem. So they come again to Jerusalem as they were walking in the temple. There come to him the chief priests and the scribes and the elders, and they say unto him, "By what authority do you do these things? And who gave you this authority to do these things?" That's what the elders, and I mean, they're these things that are happening at the temple are starting to culminate. They've been provoked. The
right,
Pharisees. First of all, you throw
right.
the tables over. Your teaching in the temple is completely. I mean, let's face it, we
Wow.
talked about getting kicked out of the churches. I mean, for some of the things we're saying, even on air here right now. I mean, some of the pastors are mad at us, can be mad at us, not mine, but in the past, I've had pastors that were mad because of some of these things that I'm teaching.
Sure.
Because it's outside of their teaching. They had all their files in order, and all of a sudden now you messed up their files. You're saying that, oh, wait a minute, he died on Wednesday, not Friday. What do we
Right.
do with our Good Friday celebrations now, right? What do
Right.
we do with the Easter egg hunts on Saturday afternoon or Sunday? I mean, we have Easter Sunday. You're messing us up, dude. You're with your stories, your teachings, and this is what they're saying to Yeshua. You're
Right.
you're you're totally not in line with us, and yet you're going in. You have the audacity to come into the temple and teach the people these things. I've had same thing said to me in a Bible study. You have the audacity to teach us at the church. Why are you teaching truth to the people? We already had this. We had our story down. We had it perfectly set, and you've messed it up.
Right.
So,
Right.
so then he says, "Well, let me ask you this question." He said, "The baptism of John, was it from heaven, or was it of men? Answer me." you know, and they reason within themselves, saying, "If we say from heaven, we will say, why then? Why didn't you believe him?"
Right.
And it would make sense. I mean, if this
Right.
man is truly the voice of the one, Ehad, God calling out in the wilderness, you know,
Right.
crying in the wilderness, like from Mount Sinai, why didn't you believe
Right.
him? But if they say
Right.
of men, they feared the people. See, they feared that the people were behind this guy, behind Yeshua. So they said, well, then is that it was of men, then why didn't Then they feared the people, for they counted John that he was a prophet indeed. So John's baptism, which a lot of these people had John's baptism repentance upon them. They had been out at the Jordan River at the place called Bethabara and 129 of John. They were at that place, same place Yeshua was baptized at, you know, where he got the baptism
Right.
of righteousness, from
Amen.
John. So they're all, questioning him. And it said, they answered and said unto Yeshua, we cannot tell. And Yeshua answering said unto them, neither do I tell you what authority I do these things.
Right.
Get lost, get lost. You guys are worthless. That's pretty much what he's saying to them. He's not using the kind of language I would use, but in a sense, that's kind of what he's saying to them.
Well, yeah, you got to you got to look at this spiritually. He's mixing everything up that's been set for almost hundreds of years, if not more, of their system, and they confront him directly. That confront, and they have to know in their spirit who he really is, and
They
there's
do.
a lot more to what actually happened, and and but to your point, Kurt, it's pretty aggressive, pretty to question God Himself.
But it's weird. And after this confrontation he has, you then you can go on to chapter 12 of Mark, and see what happens next. I mean, this is Monday, at the temple, and what he's going to teach on, and he's going to teach. And I don't think we need to go there because we're more into the chronology of this thing more than his teachings but it's very valuable and it's very good. And this is one of your favorite teachings. This is teaching about the vineyard, and the servant. The servants that were sent to the vineyard were the prophets, and how they killed the prophets. And he's already doing a dig at them, that you've killed all the prophets. Now your intention is the one that owns the vineyard. The father sends his son. He's the one that owns the vineyard. The father, he
Right,
sends only his only begotten son. Surely you will honor him, and but they're not, and that's the point. And so they look to kill him and cast him out of the vineyard. And he goes on to condemn them basically to their faces, and they're standing on the sidelines going, wait a minute, is that wait, you talking about me? you
Right.
know, am I the one that
Right.
killed the prophet? Are we the ones that killed the prophets? Are we the ones that seek to kill you? The answer is yes, yes. You're the
Yes.
one. You got it. You got it down correctly.
Yeah.
So then they go on to question him about things of the law and examine him and that kind of thing. Again, this lamb that was chosen, that has been selected to be the lamb that took away the sin of the world, the Pesach lamb, is being examined by the Pharisees, by the
Amen.
law, by the ones that gave the law, the lawgivers, the law keepers. They're examining him and asking him questions about the law. So this
Right.
this this goes on, and I don't know. We don't have time to talk about everything here, but this is what's happening on Monday. Monday afternoon, and I think we ought to, maybe break here pretty soon, and we'll talk about Monday night, because Monday night he's going to be at dinner. This is now we're getting down to where it's going to be 2 days, and Monday night will turn into Tuesday because their evening begins another day. So it's going to be
Begin.
2 days. Then yeah. So
Yep.
we
Okay.
can do that
Yeah. Yeah, we
on the
should.
next.
We should. Yeah, and I'll break this up and I'll do my very best to make it
Right,
easy to follow in chronological order and
oh, let me add one. Can I add one little thing to this thing, this son
sure.
of David thing, where he says this? This
Right.
is, and I forgot to mention this. That's why I thought it was important. He asked him this question. He says, David, whose son was he? And they ask him that.
Right.
David, therefore, he said that they say, hey, well, the Messiah is going to be the son of David. So what he's doing in this whole thing, he's trying to give credibility to, yes, am I your Messiah or not? We've
Right.
established, a lot of things about who I am, but let me say, I fit the mold of the Messiah perfectly, and I am of the line of David. I'm basically the root of David,
Right.
but I'm also the lineage of David. On my mom and dad's side, my adopted dad and my mom were both of the line of David. And, so he talks about that. And that's interesting. I think you need to read that. It's in 1235 of Mark. So what he says
Okay.
about that, the Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand till I make your enemies your footstool. And he talks about that. David, therefore, himself call him Lord. And, whose son? Whose son is he talking about there? Who's the son?
Right. Right.
So anyway,
Right. Right. Well, and you'll probably hear this again, but to Kurt's point, who he's speaking to, the Pharisees and Sadducees, remember they're learned. They have this is their entire job is to study
yeah,
and understand. And so whereas, we're playing catch up because they've done this all their lives, many of them chosen from, birth to participate in that and I don't want to say it's really important because the Pharisees and Sadducees at that time weren't in the line of Aaron. They were much. I can't prove all of that, or maybe some could be, or mixed, or whatever. But remember, John the Baptist probably was the last priest in the line of Aaron to be presented correctly. I would think in my heart that's the way I see it.
and to your point, a lot of the Pharisees and a lot of the Sadducees, a lot of that Pharisaical lineage came from, the what was going to say?
Maccabees,
Yeah,
Maccabees probably
the lineage, Hasmoneans.
has okay, yeah.
Hasmoneans, yeah, which
Be
was
more
a
specific,
descent, yeah,
right?
was a product of the Maccabean revolt, that took place in 168 BC. So
Right.
these guys, all they are is the self-proclaimed priests of that time, Jonathan and his descendants, down to what was it?
The Herods,
Anyway, and
yeah,
I haven't
yeah,
prepared for myself for it, but anyway, clear
yeah,
down. Well, Herod married into the lineage, so
right,
Herod himself is a product of that Hasmonean
right,
lineage. And then these Pharisees of are a product of that themselves through these false priests, false proclaimed priests, because they saw it as a position of power,
Right.
and so they proclaimed themselves as priests, but they really weren't of the Levitical line, which
Right.
is important. So these guys aren't necessarily Levites. I'm not positive. I'm not sure of that, but I don't think they're totally Levitical because even I think Yeshua himself even questions their legitimacy. So
Right.
remember, we taught. You just said it. John the Baptist was of the lineage, of Aaron. Well, Yeshua himself is of a priesthood too. He's got Levitical uh, uh, blood in him from his mother's side because
Right.
Elizabeth, the aunt of Mary, she was a daughter of Aaron, so it means Mary had Levitical blood, of Aaron. She had
Right.
some lineage of Aaron, not all, but she had some. So he had a little bit of Aaron blood flowing through his, well, through adoption. He had because
Right.
he didn't really have a part of Mary, but in the lineage of Mary, he had Levitical rights. But more importantly than that, he is the son of the Father, and his father, Yahweh, was of the line of Melchizedek, the eternal
Right.
priest, the one
Right.
without mother or father or lineage. See, he's from another priesthood, and he's the high priest himself. And he is the ultimate high priest because everything else is a shadow. The Levites were nothing more than a shadow of the Melchizedek priesthood from heaven.
Created by
Yeah,
God at a time.
got a little
Yeah.
deeper there. You know,
Right. Right. And just to the last point on that, remember they behead John. So they
yeah,
and so don't let all the confusion or the noise of who did what and how it happened. It's all noise if you don't understand what Yeshua was doing, and because everybody wants you to believe other things, I might say, but that's
and
a really good teaching, Kurt. Really,
and one
really,
last thing, you mentioned John, the Nazarite. Be careful on your Nazarite vows. There was some people in our church that said, "I'm going to take a Nazarite vow." Well, John was a Nazarite. Nazarite,
uh,
yeah. You cut your hair off.
yeah, he's it.
you know,
Yeah, and the
Well,
beard,
I was,
and the
I was
beard.
going to mention Samson in that. When he got his hair cut, I mean, that was his strength was in his hair and his
Right,
on his head, on his head. Samuel on his head, Samuel.
right,
Elisha. They called him a bald head. Bald headed. But his covering was God, not his hair.
right,
So the point is, they didn't take a Nazarite vow. When you take a Nazarite vow, be careful. Guard your head because John the Baptist lost his head because of his Nazarite vow. He was a Nazarite, so he took his head. Uh,
right,
so and Samson had his hair cut, and Paul himself took a Nazarite vow, and in Rome was beheaded. So
right,
be
right.
careful.
All
Don't
right,
lose your head. Don't lose your head or be a Nazarite.
all right. So those that are following close, we're wrapping up the second day. We're going to
Right,
begin with the evening, which is the beginning of the third day next. Okay.
right,
And
right.
we'll say shalom in case you
Come on.
sleep or don't
Yeah.
go right to the
And
next one.
happy Pesach week.
Amen, amen, brother. All right, all right.
Okay. Bye bye.